Revanche Hecatombe is the second full-length album from AÇOITE. This is a Brazilian black death metal band, a death thrash metal band in the old school style, and one that has done well to study the old ways, the old South American extreme metal style, very much influenced by early Sepultura, Volcano, Panic, and many other bands. So obviously there are too many to count. There's too many that I'd like to talk to, but basically we're looking at an 80s style of what people used to call deathcore back in the day, which was death metal played at kind of a almost like a crossover hardcore punk level pace. And so that meant for a lot of early influences towards black and death metal worldwide. And seeing as how like some of my favorite records are like Schizophrenia, I kind of lean a little bit more towards the thrash metal side of things, and that's one part of what AÇOITE do in their sound, is that they're taking the late 80s thrash metal style, the evil thrash metal and the death thrash of it all, and then they're working it in with the more intense kind of grinding stuff that we got from like Sarcophago, Sex Thrash, and whatnot. So their first record split the difference. It kind of worked with both sides of that equation, and it felt like like it didn't always have the riffs, but it had the right idea, that and I like that of any band that's going to reference records like Rotten Church and Toxic Diffusion, because I grew up with those records influencing my exploration of extreme metal in general, because my launching point was early Sepultura, like a lot of people. But the way that I went with it was I looked back closer at Brazilian music and found not only what influenced those bands like Sodom and Hellhammer and all that, but also looked at the other bands that were around at the time wanting more of the same sound. And so that's what's exciting for me about a band like this, is you can tell they like a lot of that same music, and it really shows in what they're doing on this record, which is, it's pretty intense. It starts out with a lot of more high energy songs, and then it works towards something a little bit more clearly thrash metal and like kind of mid 80s thrash metal style in general. So we'll cut to an example here, and then we'll kind of get on with what this album is all about and what to expect from it overall. So it does a lot for the authenticity of this record, or at least the excitement of this record, is that they got a lot of these original members of bands like Holocausto, Volcano, and others to play on songs here. And what that does is it adds those voices to the mania of this record. And the cool thing about it is that the songs that they have members of Volcano on, they sound like that band, and it's intense in the way that we work from those grinding, faster paced black death metal songs that have a little bit of thrash in there to more thrash metal leaning sounds on the second half. So it feels like we're rushing through the record. It's not a very long record, but in this time around, I feel like they've gotten the production values especially right. Now, what does that mean exactly for South American extreme metal? It means that the drums are very active and kind of punishing throughout, but not necessarily brutal in the like late 90s sense of death metal drumming. Surprisingly, the bass guitar is very prominent in the production values here. It's a great percussive sound. It hits in every case, and that is an aspect of Brazilian thrash metal that came later on once the production values kind of increased a little bit, moving towards the 90s. But also we get the guitar sound, which is very specific. Like a lot of the bands back in the day had kind of a fizzling, broken, kind of fuzzed out sound. The distortion was probably an overdrive pedal that was kind of at the end of its days, and they don't quite replicate that here. This is a solid guitar sound with a couple of layers on it, but they keep it pretty honest. They keep this feeling like it was live in studio recorded sounding, and the vocalist goes over the top all over the place. And he's got these great classic old school vocalists to compete with here on these tracks, and so I think he holds his own pretty well. But the star here is probably the drummer and the bassist, and the way that they drive the movement throughout the whole thing. The rhythm section really carries this record in an awesome way, because they can can go from those blasting black death metal feeling songs to the death thrash metal stuff and make it all work together without feeling like it's a total neck snap to transition. And I think this really starts to count later on when we get to these like the cover songs on this record. Now I have all three of the cover songs to kind of talk about, and they actually have members of some of these bands with Dorsal Atlantica's Carlos Lopez on there for one song and providing a guest solo. But in general, we get really deep cuts from Brazilian metal of the time and 80s metal, whether it's Virus's Matthew Hopkins song, which is from an obscure compilation. The band eventually released like a re-recording of all their songs many years later, but this is like 1984 we're talking about. So interesting melodic song that they've made their own on here. Psychic Possessors, two records are very hardcore punk influence, like 80s hardcore punk and crossover. You feel it more on the second one, but they picked a song from the first one, which is practically a death metal sounding record, but you can feel the hardcore influence on this song as they amplify the speed and lean into the breakdown of it. And so I really like those. But I figure most people will get the vinyl version of this record. So the Dorsal Atlantica cover is pretty special in terms of just being a great interpretation of that band's sound. They really can lock into 80s thrash metal feeling pretty solid as they show on the second half of this record. And so I was pretty excited about that song just because I'm a fan of the band. I kind of like some of their more weird records a little bit later on, but of course the early stuff is classic, and you can tell they're huge fans of it by they're pretty excited to have these people on this record. So anyway, there's a lot of options there, but overall I think this record is pretty representative of what they're going for. They've done a much better job in terms of the recording than the first record, but that's not as important as kind of nailing the songs. And I think that all of this record is intense death thrashing Brazilian metal, and I think that's just they've hit it on the mark for my taste. That's something that I'm always going to be excited about. It's a type of music that I've loved longer than most types of extreme metal, and so that gets a very high recommendation for me. Completely solid band. Watch the music video that's under this. I think it kind of shows you what they're all about, and for me, it's one of the coolest music videos I've seen this year. Nothing but enthusiasm for this band. I'd like to see how this record holds up when I go to do my like end of the year list, but overall, I was impressed, and I'd like to hear more in the long run. So this released today, October 25th. Go ahead and check it out. It's available in a lot of different territories, and read my review for more in-depth thoughts. Some kind of fan stuff in there too, and I definitely enjoyed this record quite a bit.